Fellowship Awardee Panel on behalf of the Office of Research and the Office of Graduate Education. We're very glad to have you here. My name is Beth Keithley. I am going to be the MC for this presentation, but we'll be moving quite along to our panelists quickly. What I want to do real quickly is just make sure we don't have to, we're just going to go over these fellowships really quick to give you an idea of the National Institutes of Health, which is what we mean by when we say NIH, and some of the fellowships. One of the things I want you all to keep in mind is that the mission of the National Institutes of Health is to increase knowledge of living systems and then to apply that to health, in order to enhance health, lengthen life, and then reduce illness and disability. So when they offer these fellowships to students, the goal of the fellowships are, of course, to create an educated workforce that can fulfill that mission of increasing knowledge and applying it. So there are a lot of different types of fellowships. One of the things that is unique to the National Institutes of Health that I want to point out is that all of these numbers are activity codes. And so there's differentiation under those codes. So there are different types of F31s and there are different types of F99s. So if you are looking at a solicitation and you read something that is different from what you have heard today, the solicitation wins always. With that being said, if you are here as an attendee, you will get these slides, so you will be able to click on these and look at all of them. But you can see there's a lot of options for graduate students and postdocs. And then interestingly enough, I do want to call out this F99, which is a graduate student into postdoc experience. So it sort of bridges that line. So most of the panel today has received an F31, and what that provides them is 5 years of graduate support. And so they get a stipend and they get, we'll go into more of the tips and tricks in a minute, but you get 5 years, and this is for you as a graduate student to get your PhD. The F99, which I mentioned, is a transition award, so that offers only a couple of years of finishing up your graduate student, getting your PhD, and then moving into 3 to 4 years of postdoc work. So to compare and contrast, they do both have the same due dates. I want to point out that at the time of the award for the F31, so that's to get your PhD, you need to be a citizen or have lawfully admitted for permanent residence. So what that means is that if you are in the process of getting your citizenship and know you'll get it soon, you can absolutely apply. You just cannot accept the award until you have the citizenship. The F99 requires you to be a citizen, permanent resident, or hold a visa. At the time of, you should be, although there is plenty of time for the F31 to be doing your dissertation, you should have an idea of what your dissertation research is going to be so that you can apply with that. And moving right along. Things to consider, I'm going to say these so that the panelists don't have to. Plan ahead and start early. We'll get into more, one of the questions I'm going to ask the panelists is, what does that really mean? But plan ahead and start early. There are many fellowships that you do not have to work with the university on. These are not among them. So the minute you think, hey, I'm going to apply for one of these, the second minute should be spent contacting the Office of Research and giving them a heads up. It will make your life so much easier. I'm in the Office of Graduate Education. I'm more than happy to work with y'all. But if you are not working with the Office of Research, at some point, I'm going to tell you to work with the Office of Research. So just proactively work with the Office of Research. You need to, both of these applications have a training plan that is required, and you need to think about that more than your research, you need to think about what kind of training you need and how that's going to look. And so you need to have a mentor that can help you walk through what a training plan looks like. So with that, I am going to pass this over to the panelists. That's who you all are here to see. We have 5 of them. I'm very happy to have Alex Arteaga, who is a biomedical engineering graduate student, Sarah Benham, who is in BBS, but a communication science and disorder student, Candler Page in neuroscience, Monica Rivas, who is an organic chemistry student, and Mark Sapicino, who is a cognition and neuroscience student. So thank you guys for coming. With that, I'm going to turn off my slide so that we can look at your beautiful faces. And I am going to start with Alex, but all of you, I would like to answer the question, what was your NIH experience like? When did you start your application? And I'm sure you didn't log it, but how much time do you think you spent on it?
Okay, so I actually started, I started as a graduate student in the fall of 2017. I was accepted as a master's student because I didn't have the prereqs necessary to be in the bioengineering department. And so what ended up happening was I took a biomaterials class with Dr. Daniele Rodriguez. And I really, really liked her class and wanted to be part of her lab. And she told me she didn't have any funding, but she encouraged me to essentially apply for the F31 grant. She said, you know, if you can get this funding, there's no way that the graduate school is going to say no to you applying to the PhD program. And so I applied for it, and it was a lengthy process. I applied for it in the fall of 2018, submitted my application. I think it was in like December-ish. And then, you know, the springtime came around, and I kept checking to see the status of my application, and it still said pending, pending, pending. And so what I ended up doing was I emailed Rob Rivers. I don't know if you guys have heard of his name, but apparently he's the program director. I emailed him, and he was like, you know what, you need to submit something called the just-in-time application, where it's like they ask you for further verification. So he sent me the just-in-time, I submitted it, and then, you know, I didn't hear back. I didn't know he was the program director. Then later on, I ended up emailing him again and saying, hey, my application is still pending. Do I need to resubmit? Do I need to do anything? And he was like, you know what, I would advise against resubmitting. And then I ended up getting a phone call. It was from Rob Rivers, and he was like, you know, I'm not supposed to tell you this right now. It's really, really close to the acceptance date, so I'm just going to let you know you got accepted because you had a high impact score, so don't resubmit, just, you know, hold tight, but you did get the application. So it was a little bit stressful on my end, but overall it was rewarding.
Great. Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, I think I had a fairly similar timeline. The years are kind of blurring right now, but what I did is I kind of had an idea of the project I wanted to tackle with this grant probably about a year before I submitted. And so, I mean, I know everyone else is probably working on multiple things at the same time. That was true for me. This wasn't the only thing I was working on. But I probably spent the first few months really kind of just workshopping the ideas, talking it out, laying the conceptual groundwork. And I will say too that my sponsor is a very seasoned grant writer and has mentored several students through the process too. So she was really able to advise me kind of, you know, all the different steps. So there really weren't any big surprises on my end. But I would say that, you know, I really started pounding the idea and getting more into the specifics probably between 6 to 9 months before I actually submitted. And, you know, I think what you wrote on your slides, Beth, about, you know, really starting early just cannot be overstated enough, because it's like the farther you get into the process, the more you realize how many moving pieces there are. And, you know, there's a lot that has to happen. So, you know, it's not just writing this out. it's getting IRB approval. I collected some pilot data in the meantime, ran through the experiments, started trying to analyze it in the way that we wanted to, presenting some, just to be able to present some preliminary data and some graphs and things like that in the actual proposal, I think was really useful to say, yes, this is feasible. Because we were really trying to anticipate what some of the concerns the reviewers might have. So, I was working with young 2-year-olds, and, I didn't want them to come back and say, this probably isn't going to work. They're a really difficult population to work with. And then I could say, yeah, I've got the data. It's feasible. We're good. So a lot of that is anticipating what might come up in the review process. But it also involves, really, as Beth mentioned, forming the training plan components and identifying what your training needs are. And I think it's really important to go through some of the steps of the actual project so that you can anticipate what they are and who you might need. So like I said, I work with children, and for example, there's always a lot of missing data that comes through. So early on we identified maybe a stats consultant would be really helpful to work with. And so just setting those pieces in motion takes quite a bit of time. And so I would say too that just that period of between 6 to 9 months before I actually ended up submitting was really kind of working out the kinks in the project and just making sure I had the right people. So I also submitted at an August deadline, and it was probably mid-October before we got the score back, and I got scored a 35. And it wasn't until a couple weeks later that we got the reviews. This was now early November. At that point, we contacted the program officer again and just said, what are your thoughts on this score? Were there any other comments that were, discussed that weren't appearing in the review, the comments and things like that? And he was pretty vague about it. And he said, we have funded that score before, but if you feel good about resubmitting, go ahead and do that. So after looking at the reviews, we thought, these are super minor. And so I did a really quick turnaround. So this was beginning of November, and we resubmitted it back in December for the December 8th deadline. And that was really doable because of the reviews, but it was, there's a lot of administrative pieces that you have to get through that make it a little bit stressful. So that was December, got reviews back in February, and it was scored a 20 for an impact score. So we had a pretty good idea, yeah, this is going to be funded, but it wasn't until April that, it becomes official, and wasn't until May that before the funding came through. So that was, by the time I submitted to the time I actually got the funding, that was a good 9-10 months. So I think that's why it's really important to plan your time too, because you lose almost a year just in the revising, resubmitting application process.
Great, thank you. Monica, what was your application experience like?
Okay, so for me, I was feeling very reckless or irresponsible when Sarah was talking, because I applied in a span of 2 months, but everybody keep in mind, I don't work with people, so I don't have to do all of those like human studies or animal studies, because that requires a bunch of extra paperwork that I didn't need to do. But for me, one thing that you put it in this slide, so we're gonna have to repeat it, but I don't think start early is definitely a thing we need to do. I didn't find out. I got a score of 40, which in the NIH it's backwards. So I guess like you want to get the lowest score possible. So I was kind of in the middle, and then I asked the program director if my application had any chance to be funded before I prepared a submission, and they actually had a phone call with me because they thought that some of my reviews were not as fair, or they really thought that my application, them as program officers, not as reviewers, they also have a say in the meeting room where they decide whether you get accepted or not. And so I had the whole thing. They recommended I submit something called a rebuttal, where you try to fit in 1 page why you deserve to be funded and to reply to their reviewers' comments in the nicest way possible, but kind of like, you're wrong, please, can I get it still? Yeah, and so then a few months later, I got it, and I can totally relate to what Alexandra was saying, that, you know, it says pending and pending, and then it changes from a blue pending to an orange pending, and you get it, and then you're like, so it takes a long time to find out. So I submitted in December 8th of last year, and then I got the notice that I received the award on June 8th, even though my project start date was supposed to be July 1st. So I started at August 1st. So it's very close time frame for when you started. Yeah.
Thanks. Mark, what do you want to add about your experience?
Well, I mean, I can say that I was thinking about submitting for an F-31 before I even got accepted into a PhD program. I know that, you know, applying to pretty much any PhD STEM, you know, graduate study, anything like that in the STEM field, it's kind of like it's double as hard, in the sense that you're not only applying for, you know, like higher graduate studies, but you're almost applying as a job applicant as well, because, you know, you're going to get your PhD funded, and you're gonna have stipend and things like that. So it's almost, you know, it's extremely difficult that way. And I think it was mentioned earlier too by Alexandra that, you know, if you have your own funding, if you bring your own funding, it's really hard for a school not to take you. You know, your application is just kind of like next level. So I mean, even if you're not coming into you know, a PhD with funding, if you come in with the, you know, intention to, and you mention that to, you know, the PI of the lab that you want to work in, they're really like happy to hear that usually. So I even in my interview before, you know, joining UT Dallas, with the PI of the lab that I wanted to join, you know, we were talking about writing an F-31 then. So it was really, really early on, and almost at the inception, you know, of my, you know, doctoral studies, that I was thinking of writing an F-31. And then just what can I add? Because I have a really similar experience with, you know, Sarah and people who submitted like over a long period of time. And I also had a quick, you know, turnaround on my resubmission. So I think I submitted last, when did I submit? Let's see. Yeah, all of the years are starting to, everything's starting to blend in a little bit. But it was, I think, let's see, last April. Yeah, so I submitted originally last April 8th. I heard back in July, and, you know, the reviews seemed really tractable. You know, they seemed like, okay, you know, these are reasonable reviews. Some of them are just good suggestions. And I think the question of, you know, what was your application experience like is a really good question, because I think I want to highlight, like, it's not only just about the award, especially if you want to go on to be your own independent researcher. You're going to be writing grants for essentially the rest of your life. And what you learn in this process is invaluable, even if you don't get the award. So I was learning a lot of things along the way. And one of the biggest things, too, was to talk to the program officer, which, you know, everyone has been saying, and I, you know, really want to, you know, underline that or highlight that, because my program officer was extremely helpful. She was really insightful. I had phone calls with her. You know, we emailed back and forth. She was really receptive to, you know, things that I was saying, and helped me a lot with my reviews, and basically encouraged me to resubmit. And I turned around and hit from April 8th. I think I submitted again. I got the summary scores back in July, and I submitted again in August. So that was a really quick turnaround, and I did all the reviews as quick as I could. I had a lot of help, you know, from UT Dallas and from the program officer, which is another thing too. So you might want to think about, and I know this is kind of a little bit further ahead, but you want to think about the department that you're applying to. So the NIH has multiple departments, and within them, they have multiple study sections that all specialize in certain areas of the field. So you really want to think about, you know, where you're going to be submitting that, because those are the people that are going to be reading your study. And if it's, you know, if it's not in the right section, things can go bad for you, and they don't, it's not like, oh, okay, it was in the wrong section and they'll put it in the right one. They're just kind of like, okay, too bad. So it was one of the things that you have to be careful about. Yeah, and then for that, I didn't write a rebuttal. I just wrote like an introduction, is what they call it, for the resubmission, and I just, it's kind of like a rebuttal, or it's more of just like a, hey, like, these are great critiques, and I changed this and this and this. I didn't change this because I thought, and you can kind of back up what you want to say. So, I mean, you learn so much about how to submit a grant in this process, and I think that's what my experience was like. So it started way from the beginning, and I learned how to communicate with the NIH and the program officers over there. How to pick a study section, and then how to work with my advisor closely. To not only write it, but get it through all of those stages of the review process, because I wasn't one of the lucky ones or one of the good ones where you can get it right on your first try, and I think from what I read, most applications that are accepted are resubmissions, so it's very probable that you'll have to go through that as well. But yeah, another thing too is, just be patient, because I was waiting on pending for a long time. So I resubmitted in August, and I didn't hear back until this past May, that I officially got it. Yeah, so I was pretty much like, oh, okay, I didn't get it. The scores were good, but it was like, I didn't hear back from August till May. May 2020 is when I heard back, May 5th. So be patient. You can check the Commons website as much as possible, but it's not going to change until it changes, right? So being patient is a really good thing, and if you're in contact with your program officer, they'll give you the insight you need, and hopefully that should calm you down. But I think that's all. I think everyone else kind of said the same. I agree with their process. My process was very similar.
Great, thank you. Well, Candler, you have the F99 award, so maybe the process was similar, but of course the award was completely different. So can you talk about sort of how your thought process and the application experience was different?
Yeah, so it's very similar. The application process is almost identical to the F31. It has 3 aims like all of the other ones, but one aim is all of the things you have done in graduate school. One aim is the time that you would, or what you would do in the last year or 2 of graduate school. And the third aim is what you would propose for a postdoc. And so I had to spend a lot of time. You can't have already identified a postdoc mentor. So you have to spend a lot of time like thinking about this like abstract idea of, if you get funded, what you would do, without having a lab identified. So that was really like the the one thing that spent a lot of time for me to think about. And then like I said, it took forever. Like everybody else said, it took forever. So I submitted, I think, for a December deadline, and got those reviews back like the middle of March. It was cutting it really close. And I got a score that was fundable, but I was only in the 3rd cohort of students to have done this application process. So they didn't have like a funding line. So I had already talked to my program officer, and she was like, yeah, you can resubmit, but like you might get it, but I can't really tell you what to do. So we resubmitted. And then on the day that my resubmission was supposed to be scored, I got an informal email saying that I received the initial award. But I still did not get that funding until August 1st, after the December I had applied. So just know that it's going to take a while. Oh, sorry. And so, that was my experience.
Great, thank you. So what I'm hearing is be patient, and it's going to take a lot of time and possibly and probably usually a rewrite or resubmission in some form or fashion. So the training plan, I think, is one of the unique aspects of this, of the application of what NIH looks for in fellowships. I'm going to start with you, Mark, and ask you, you've touched a little bit on the training plan, but can you talk about a little bit more and more specifically what you look for in a mentor?
Sure. So this was actually something that during the review process, after I got my initial summary statement back, I was talking to the program officer, and she was like, listen, this is a fellowship to make sure that you develop into an independent researcher. So this is really geared towards people that, don't have all of the skills that they need already, right? This is to get you there. And so I'm really reminded of, my specialty isn't developmental psych, but I'm really reminded of the kind of scaffolding or like those zones of proximal development where you want to kind of propose something that's, definitely just above, your skill set right now. It's definitely something you don't know, but something that you can see yourself achieving right in 2 to 3 years or 5 years, however long you're proposing. So also that's just an aside. You don't have to propose the whole 5 years. So I only have about 2 years left, I'm estimating, of my PhD. So I just asked for 2 years. And if you ask for less money, you might get, there might be more of a chance that they give it to you. So it's just another a quick aside. But yeah, so when you're looking and you're making a training plan, you kind of want to make these things where, you can see yourself doing things that you really want to learn to help you become an independent researcher that you might not quite know right now. And of course, you want to pick people that are knowledgeable in this area. But I think even more important sometimes is people that is picking people that are approachable and kind, because you're gonna be screwing up a lot. Like you're gonna be asking questions that you think are dumb, that aren't dumb, but that are just vital and critical to you learning a new skill. And so you really want to get people that are approachable, that have the time to take out of the day to, I guess, virtually meet with you now. Hopefully that changes, but to go over things in depth with you, because they're really going to be like teachers in a way. Your own kind of small seminar class, between you and the professor. And it's really important that you feel comfortable with them, because, at this point too, it's almost, every professor is an expert in their field. So if you kind of lean towards the ones that are more approachable and that you feel more comfortable with, you're probably going to learn a lot more, because you're probably going to ask them more questions than you normally would if you're kind of apprehensive about that. So I went towards people I felt really comfortable with, people that I had actually been working with already, people that I had met on, different occasions, especially when we still had meetings in person, that, came into some of our lab meetings and helped us with, helped my PI with something. And kind of help the lab with something. And, we had discussions from there, and I was like, oh, this person would be really great if I need, something with biostatistics, this person would be great. And then, you reach out to them and ask in the writing process if they would be okay with it, and if they would be okay with writing you a letter of support. And, that's a good way also to gauge whether or not they're going to be great in this process, because if they're not responsive, or if they kind of really don't write you a great letter, it's it's not going to be a good sign early on. So so those are the things I kind of look for. I don't know about you guys.
Great, thank you, Monica. Talk to us about your training plan and what you look for in a mentor, please.
Yes. So for me, my experience is completely different from Mark, because I transferred to UTD from a different university where I had a different fellowship. And so I already had done 2 years of graduate school with my mentor when I applied to my fellowship, because one of the sort of not conditions, because I knew I was moving to follow my mentor. That's one thing you as a good mentor, when you follow them around the country. But the condition is like, I have a fully funded fellowship at this school, maybe I want one there. And he's like, yeah, we'll apply to something. So that's different. when I looked at the application, and I'm pretty sure when any of you look at the application for this F31, it's like written in English, but it's very overwhelming. Like there's a lot of things that you need to do, and it's almost like you need to have 20 years of experience to apply to this kind of thing, and you don't. But at the same time, the working with your mentor is very important in a sense where, hey, can I do this? Is this completely impossible? They said, manage somebody that can manage your expectations, saying, okay, I want to complete this. Said maybe that's a good idea, but it is what they call high risk, high reward, meaning it's probably not going to happen, but it would be super cool if it did. And you have to balance that a little bit with something that's a little bit more straightforward. For me, I didn't have a lot of preliminary results other than the track record of my laboratory and the chemistry that they have published before me. And so it could say, maybe I haven't done this, but I'm pretty sure I can ask anybody in my group how to do it type of situation. That's kind of something that I would look for in a mentor is experience in the field that you want to join. And as far as the training plan, I think one of the most, so the first 2 years of my graduate experience, I was a little bit kind of all over the place in as far as what I was doing, because you're teaching, you're learning, you're taking classes, you're doing research. You don't have a lot of time to come up with a specific bullet point plan of what I'm going to do next year. So since I got funding for 2 years, I guess I was in my 3rd year when I applied. Since I got funding for 2 years, I did have to specify up to 100% by percentage of the year, how much time and what would I do for each activity and each part of my project. And so when I submitted that application, I said, I don't care if I get it or not. Obviously, it'd be super cool that I did, but I have the next 2 years of my graduate career planned out. What experiments, what could go wrong, how could I help that process? And I think that's exactly what you want to do for your training plan, is not just for your research strategy, what could go wrong, how could I fix that, but also for what am I going to do after I graduate. So for me, I want to be a faculty member. I want to be in a position to be a mentor and a researcher. So I have to put in there something like career development. Where am I going to meet the people I'm going to work with? What kind of field I want to join after I complete this fellowship or this PhD program. So that's the kinds of conferences that I need to attend. And in order to get to those conferences, what kind of papers do I want to publish and where, and how am I going to write those manuscripts? So that was kind of my thinking about the training plan. Yeah, I think you have to definitely meet your mentor before you start this process, hopefully in person, not via Zoom, but whatever. Just have an honest conversation to manage your expectations, to get guidance on the research, and to see whether or not they have experience taking other students where you want to go, would be my thing.
Great, thank you.
Sort
Kendra, can you talk about your training plan and what you look for in a mentor? You talked a little bit about the sort of hypothetical mentor search, but a little more on that would be great.
So I'm not totally sure how this fits into like my application process, because I'd been working with my mentor for 4 years at the time that I'd submitted it. But overall, when I look for a mentor, I look for someone who's excited about what I'm doing and also has students that aren't miserable. So I spend a lot of time talking to students of the person that I'm going to work for when I look for a mentor, just because like they might come off really great in person, but not so great when you actually have to work with them. And then for the F99, I also, so the proposed work I was going to do was in a different, I mean, the same general field, but a different subfield. So I added on not mentors, but like advisors to my grants. So we had two, in addition to my main PI, we had letters of support and letters saying that they would help me do the work from two different people in the field that I was interested in doing additional work in. And when I was looking for those people, I was just looking for people who knew what they were doing and were willing to like answer my phone calls and return my emails. And then I guess when I was writing about like what my potential advisor would be like, I was saying that he or she would mentor students that were going into the field that I wanted to go into. So they mentored students that traditionally went into academia versus students that would go into industry. So that was my experience. But yeah, we spent a lot of time on the F99 training plan, finding people that could help me and getting letters from those people, just because we were proposing things that our lab had done some work in, but like that wasn't their number one thing that they were known for. So that's what I did.
Great, thank you. Sarah, can you talk about what you look for in a mentor and your training plan?
So one of the things that, I mean, I agree with what everyone has already said. I mean, I was already working with my sponsor by the time that I applied, but I think something that is really important to also consider is that what reviewers are looking for is that there's enough shared ground between you and your sponsor and the lab that you're working in, so that the training plan is successful, but it's also different enough from what your PI is doing so that it sets you apart. Because really the goal is to start thinking programmatically, to start thinking independently. And so they want to see the, emerging skills that you have, kind of like Mark touched on as well too, of, enough of things that you already know how to do so that this is going to be a successful package, but also new things that will help you on your path to independence. And so I know that it's something that they touched on in my reviews as well, of really trying to, ensure that I was different enough from the work that my sponsor was doing so that, I could be more independent. And I think too, what's also really important is I involved a few consultants too that are on in the training plan. So as I mentioned before, early on, I'd identified some specific training areas. And I think what's so important about the training plan, and just a common theme throughout, is that everything really needs to be this cohesive package. And it really needs to dovetail really nicely with, the statement that your sponsor writes about you, the training plan, the bio sketches that everybody submits. And I too asked for letters of support in addition to the bio sketches of my consultants, just to really reiterate that they had the expertise that I was really needing for this training plan, and that they were willing to commit the time and meetings and things like that to ensure that it was successful. And that is something that definitely the reviewers comment on too, because I have one of the consultants is not at UTD, and they were concerned about how frequently we would be able to meet and what that would mean to have an offsite consultant. And so that was something they really asked for me to elaborate more on in the resubmission, to really outline his role and how we were going to make it work. I don't know if that would be the case anymore since everything is online now, but that was an area of their concern. So they do look for ensuring that all of these different consultants bring in the right elements to your training plan and that you have a really solid package together. And then I think another important thing that I hit on before too was about contingency plans in your training plan. So for example, I wanted to attend this month-long workshop to kind of work on some areas in my training plan. And there was a possibility that I didn't get into the workshop. So the reviewers were really looking for what happens if you can't carry out this part of your training plan. What's your plan B? What's your plan C? And so I think that's also an important part of it too, is thinking about all the possibilities of whether or not you're going to be able to get exactly what you need for the training plan. And let me think if there is something else. I think that's about it. So, yep.
Great, Sarah, thank you. Alex, talk about your training plan and what you look for in a mentor, please.
I'm actually gonna move rooms because the vacuum is coming. I'm sorry. Okay, so my situation was a little bit different. In my case, I was actually expecting a baby when I was interviewing with all the different PIs. And what ended up happening was every single PI that I would go to, they would actually focus more so on what I was going to do with the baby and like how I was going to take care of the baby versus how I could contribute to the lab. And so one of the main things that I would recommend is have or find a mentor that's interested in you. Find a mentor that is going to encourage you to do your best and is going to be enthusiastic about what you're studying and is willing to give you that chance and give you be able to give you feedback. So that's very, very important. And then in terms of training plan, so once I took the biomaterials class, I, became very enthusiastic about the subject because of the fact that my professor was very enthusiastic about the subject. So in terms of the training plan, I wanted to essentially learn everything I could about how I could essentially make biomaterials better, how I could analyze biomaterials, how these biomaterials not only are affected by the body, but how they also affect the body as well. So in terms of a training plan, like I really wanted to get more, more expertise in both spectrometry, in vivo work, in vitro work. Like all of these things went into my training plan and what I wanted to do with the fellowship.
This is the last question before we throw it to the attendees and the chat room. So chat room attendees, if you want to start filling this up with questions, now would be an excellent time. But before we start asking you those questions, Candler, what was the one thing you wish you knew before you started your application?
Yeah, so the one thing that I really wish that I had been driven home more was how much the non-science parts matter. So I think that our PIs, and I even took a grant writing class where the entire focus was on it's like 4 pages, I think maybe 6 pages of actual science, but the grant package is 70 pages long. And so the reviews that I got really didn't have any objections to the science that I was doing. It was all about things like what happens if you can't find the lab that you specifically want to go to. And then I remember, so later on at SFN, one of the, it wasn't the program officer, but it's like the chair of the review board came to my poster at SFN and was like, oh, I remember your application. And he couldn't tell me anything about the science that I'd done, but they spent a lot of time. He's remembered my personal statement and my training plan. And so the personal statement and my PI's bio sketch is 2 paragraphs long, just kind of I do research. And there's not a whole lot of emphasis and thought put there, but in my bio sketch, I spent a lot of time on the personal statement, and that seemed to pay off. And so I think that our bosses and our mentors have a lot of experience getting very research focused grants. And then the NIH, I mean, it's not a secret, it's not hidden. I think that on the website, they say that the fellowships are funding a person, not particularly an idea. And so pay a lot of attention. I should have paid more attention to the things that weren't just the science. I mean, the science has to be good, but everything else has to be just as good too. So it's for me.
Great, thank you. I was going to go to you next, Alex, but I'm going to give you a minute to get settled. And Monica's head looked like she was going to explode in agreement while Chandler was talking. So I'm going to see, Monica, what you were thinking.
Yes, thank you, Beth. I also was just mind blown by the kind of non-science things that we were supposed to do. I ended up writing, which don't do this, please, ended up writing the most important part of my research strategy, like almost the night before I had to submit everything, because I had no idea how many administrative obstacles I had to face. And one of the great things about having a fully funded mentor and collaborator is that, you know, they've been through it before, but one of the downfalls might be that they're also incredibly busy people. So it's okay, and you might find that if you ask for a letter of support, and you may have to write the draft or some points that you might want to be mentioned in your letter. And so certain things like that you might have to do that don't even shouldn't even be part of your part of the application, you might have to do. Or for instance, I applied to the F31 is the parent. I applied to the minority one. Beth, I forget the name of it, but the minority version. And so one of the parts is like a letter from the institution stating the commitment to diversity and inclusion. And I guess that had never been done before. So I had to also like maybe write a draft and say, hey, this is probably, if you have time, can you please sign this? Like things like that take a lot of office time when you could be doing your research or literature search. But I was gonna add something about collaboration. I wrote this down while Candler was talking, that one of the things that I didn't expect so much was how much I would benefit from collaborating with people. Like I remember as soon as I contacted Beth early in my process, which is pretty short. I need help with this or that, and like just the willingness of people that are gonna help you, and it's gonna change everything. So like asking for help really helped me. The NIH has a focus on public health, which from organic chemistry perspective, it's a little bit hard to come by because we deal with molecules, not like animals or people. And so I was so lucky that my advisor was able to make the connection with me and a professor at UT Southwestern so that we could create a collaboration. So if you sometimes might feel that maybe I really want this fellowship, it sounds like it's right up my alley, I just don't know quite how to tie it into the exact institute, like the Institute of Biomedical Imaging or Institute of this. How do I fit it to their mission? Because they're also looking for you to tailor that experience to their mission. Looking for a collaborator might be the answer for you as well. Like I'll do some of the chemistry and then maybe apply it to your specific area, which in my case is PET imaging. So turn my chemistry into radiochemistry, things like that. So the extent to which you don't do science and also the amount of collaboration, because yeah, they're funding a person, but they're also counting on this person to be able to have the resources to connect with the people that are gonna help you get through it. I think that's something that's important. Yes.
Great, thank you. Alex, you look like you are in a good place to answer this question now. So what is the one thing you wish you had known before you started your application?
So one thing I wish I had known was how long the IRB process takes. So in my case, I was wanting to get orthopedic implants from a local hospital, and I had to get IRB approval apparently prior to applying to the NIH. And the IRB approval, with all the editing and back and forth emails and just, you know, the whole approval process, it takes a really long time. So I was in a situation where, you know, hadn't gotten approved, and the submission deadline was coming up. And so it started getting more and more and more stressful. So what I had to do was literally go knocking on doors and just, hey, how's that application come in? Like, can we hurry it up, because I'm about to lose this opportunity. And so one thing I would suggest to everyone is, if you are going to do any type of clinical work, or anything that requires an IRB or even an IACUC, try to get that approved prior to applying. And I guess another thing is, like Monica said, there's so many people that are willing to help you out. If you have any questions, I was emailing the Office of Research and Grants back and forth with all the questions when I was applying. So everything that you submit actually has to be submitted through them. So even though you get your whole application ready to go, they're the ones that are going to check everything for you and literally like copy and paste it into the portal. So they are really, really helpful if you guys have any questions on how to even fill it out. So that's one thing that I wish I had known prior to applying.
Great, thank you. Mark, what was the one thing you wish you knew before you started your application?
So I think the biggest thing too is that they really are funding the person. And when you submit your bio sketch, they're going to get your they want all of your grades all the way back to undergrad. So, when I was an undergrad, doing my thing, I had no idea, in the future that, these grades would come back and be vetted essentially for this grant. So that was something that I did not see coming, and it was kind of, for me, that was one of the things that were like, he was an okay undergrad. I kind of saved myself with having papers and posters and things like that, a lot of research productivity, which I think they were happier about, and my grades in grad school were much better, obviously. So that was one thing that, if you're an undergrad right now and you think, oh, this one grade won't matter, it does. I'm sorry. It'll still be mattering for a little bit more, at least if you're trying to, submit an F31 with a bio sketch on it. And then the other thing I would say, besides echoing everything else everyone else said, I totally agree with everything else. You're going to have to submit earlier than the actual deadline. That's a good thing to mention. Just be patient. One thing for me was I was kind of neurotic when I was waiting, because I know I just put it in the chat, but it took about 13 months, for me to finally get the notice of award from the initial submission. So it was, and then obviously about a year of writing and prep before that. So it's just it's a marathon. It's not a race, like take it day by day, try to learn. I think that's the biggest thing too. In the beginning, when I first started writing, I really didn't have much hope, which in a way was a blessing, because I was like, you know what, let me just write this as best as I can, and whatever happens, happens. I'll just learn at least something about grant writing, right? So I think that was kind of a blessing in a way, because I really, took my time with it and learned a lot. But then just to be patient when you submit it, submit it and then go do something else for like 6 months. Because you don't want to be checking Commons every 5 minutes. That's what I got for that.
Thanks. Sarah, how about you? What was one thing you wish you knew before you started?
Well, I think everyone has pretty much touched on similar issues, but I think I'm going to reiterate what Candler was saying earlier too about all those non-scientific pieces. It's easy to really put your energy into writing the research proposal, and certainly that's very important, and also the training plan, things like that. But there are a lot of the other pieces that are so much more time consuming than you anticipate. And especially, I didn't have to do the clinical trials, but now that's a formal piece of the application process, and I know that'll add time. But there's a lot of things that you have to collect from other people too. So you have to get information from your specific program about, graduation success in the last 5 years, or, things like that, or what's outlined the RCR training, and enrollment information and other human subjects related pieces that were applicable to my application. And all of that takes more time than I thought. And so I think leaving plenty of time for that, and giving people plenty of time as well for responding to you. I really valued getting other outside readers for my application too. And again, the timing there is critical, is giving people enough time to review and to provide comments and ask questions and kind of workshop it too. I think that was also a really critical piece. So that would be my takeaway there.
Great, thank you. Sarah, while I have you, there is a question in the chat that and it is, and everyone's acknowledging that you've talked about it, but can you kind of give us the number of months from application to notification, and then how many years of funding you received?
Oh, yeah. So mine was about 10 months from application to award, but I guess it would be about 8 months from application to notification of award. And then I applied for 2 years of funding.
Great, thank you. Alex, same question.
So I applied, it was probably December, and I found out in April that I was going to get funding for May. So about 6 months.
Great, thanks. We've had a question about sort of opinions on how dependent are grades for getting this opportunity. Is it an initial filter? I know Mark mentioned that he was not the world's greatest undergraduate, and there's nothing wrong with that. Monica in the chat also mentioned that perhaps she wasn't the world's greatest undergraduate.
I was the worst.
So the three of you who have not touched on this would start with you, Sarah. Without calling you out, how were you as an undergraduate? Do you feel like those grades were a filter, or how do you feel your undergraduate grades may have played into your experience?
Well, my sponsor early on said they're either going to care about your grades or they're not going to care about your grades. And I happened to get one reviewer who did comment on my grades, and I was not a terrible student. I got like the lowest grade I ever got in undergrad was a B, and they still commented on it. They said, wow, like her grades really improved once she got to grad school. I'm like, what are we, it was kind of a strange comment. So, I mean, I didn't address it. I didn't really have the experience where I felt that hindered my application anyway, but I did think it was kind of strange. I mean, I went to a liberal arts undergrad, so this was like, journey to religion or something like that had no bearing on what I'm doing now. So it was kind of a funny comment, but, I think that if it's something that really is where you anticipate it being a problem, I think that you can address it in your personal statement, somewhere in your bio sketch too, about kind of upward trajectories, as someone else mentioned. So yeah, in my case, it didn't really weigh in on it, but they did comment, so not sure why.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Yeah, to what Sarah was saying. So when one of my reviewers said like she had very bad grades in undergrad, and I had A's and B's, but I also had the C's, and I even got one D, and it was in organic chemistry, which is my PhD topic. And then when I talked to the program officers, when they were trying to sort of fight for me to the advisory committee, I was like, hey, there's nothing I can do about those grades now, but should I mention this in my rebuttal? Because this is basically kind of notes for them to mention to the committee. It was not very like super formal. Well, everything within NIH is super formal, but like within reason. And they said, you know what? No, we don't want to talk about your undergrad grades. If you want to mention something, mention your research experience. So I did get, I a lot of research experience in undergrad, and I also took 2 gap years between undergrad and grad school. And in that time, I was also a volunteer researcher in a couple of labs while I was being a waitress. But so in those times, like, I think it's also how you frame it, because you can say I had bad grades because so and so happened, or you can say I had bad grades, but look how passionate I was about the research I was doing. Or at this point in my college experience, I realized I didn't care much, which is true for me. I didn't care much about biology. I really just wanted to focus on chemistry, so I kind of like let that go. But like that's something that you can say. I don't think there's like grad school applications where they just kind of, if you don't meet a certain score, they drop you out. I don't think that's what they do. They're more, they wouldn't ask you to submit a 70-page application if they're just gonna kick it out for your undergrad music class or whatever. Yeah.
Alex or Candler, either of you want to mention this? I mean, you all won the fellowship, but I'm very embarrassed asking you guys about your undergraduate grades.
So for the F99, your undergraduate grades get dropped. They just ask you what classes you took as undergrad, so they don't come up. I will say that for the F31, I got a C in organic chemistry, and a reviewer did mention that on my F31 applications, but I don't think that that's what stood in my way. I think that was just kind of reviewer being a reviewer. But for the F99, the grades go away, and they only pay attention to grad school grades. They even come first on the biosketch, so it doesn't matter after you get to a certain point, the grades don't matter anymore. So
for me, I didn't get any comments on my grades, so sorry guys. But I did get a comment on how I didn't have any publications as an undergrad, and that's kind of tough because being an undergrad, you're at your graduate students' disposal. If they want to include you in the paper, they do. If not, they don't. And so in terms of that was my negative comment. But I would say, if you have if you have any type of research experience, put that. If you have any extracurricular activities that you did, put that, because chances are that sometimes the reviewer might have some kind of relation to something that you did or the path that you're going. So I would say, if your grades aren't that good, don't worry about it. As long as you have other stuff to supplement that, I think you'll be fine.
Great, thank you so much for that. Looking to see if there are any other questions. Here we go. Oh, so while I am waiting for more questions, picking somebody at random, Mark, what was the most difficult part of the application to write and why?
Oh, to write. See, because you'd think that it would be the research strategy, maybe, coming from not knowing anything. But that was actually probably the easiest part, because it's kind of about what you're doing, what you're interested in, the science. And it's really what is kind of fun to write in a way, because you get to just design your own study. And so I think I can kind of echo what everyone was saying before, where it's kind of the non-sciencey parts where you're like, oh man, how do I say how this, training plan is going to get me to, understand this technique, and these collaborators are going to facilitate that. And so it's kind of like, and I think Sarah mentioned it too before, is making it all cohesive, making it all seem like it's part of one big goal, which is your study. That every single thing that you're mentioning, you really don't want anything superfluous in the application, because you don't want them going, what is this for? Because a lot of times you kind of, or at least I got, very like, oh, I'll throw in, diffusion imaging in there, and I'll throw in this in there, and I'll throw in that in there, and I'll do all that, and they're just kind of like, if it's not part of, your development, or if it's not part of the question, you really don't want it in there, because it's going to kind of mud everything out. So you really want it to be extremely cohesive. You want every almost line in there to be about, what you're your application is about. So that was something that I don't know if I want to, if it was really difficult, but it was definitely something that I, would go through the application multiple times and make sure that everything was on that same cohesive track. So that was something that I really focused on.
Great, thank you. All right, here is a question. Is it important to design a research plan that is different from current research, or can you use previous methods for guidance? I would definitely like Candler to answer that because of the different grant that she has, but then anybody with the F31 who wants to touch on that, or all of you can. But Candler, can you touch on that in light of the whole postdoc aspect?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different ways that you can approach this. The way that I did it was that I said I was going to stay in my field, like my general area of research, but then branch out into different techniques. And so it was really, the F99 is nice because you get to spend a big portion of it talking about the things that you have achieved as part of the research strategy. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's not just your personal statement. You do get to spend a page and a half or something like that talking about the things that you've done in graduate school. And then from there, I kind of built off and said, okay, I've done this, but this is the new technique that I'm going to learn and branch out, and this is how I'm going to do it. And then for my postdoc, I said that I was going to learn an additional technique that would add on. So I did like build up like the research techniques that I was using, but based on research I had already done. Does that make sense?
Great, thanks. Alex, Sarah, Monica, Mark, any thoughts on designing a research plan that's different from current research?
I had a kind of a unique game, and I think Laura is the person. I think I know you. I think you might be in the same situation where you have a collaboration. So oh, hi. So for me, it was a lot of the background was things that I had done and focused on sort of convincing the reviewers that I have the basic skills to do it. But at the same time, I branched out into a new area of research, trying to get into this radiochemistry area. And if you're going to try to do that, I would definitely recommend, like for me, I put into my training plan, I am not a medicinal chemist or a bioimaging expert by any means. And so in the first year of my fellowship, I am going to take this course that is taught by my collaborator at UT Southwestern. And so I'm going to be, maybe I don't know right now, but I will. So once you are writing your research strategy, the way that I sort of had it laid out was I always have like a little notebook on the side when I'm typing. And so I don't know, like if I'm writing, this is what I'm going to do on my specific aims. If I don't know how I'm going to achieve that, I would write that note for my training plan. I would, if I put myself in the laboratory that day, I would have no idea where to begin. Okay, that means I probably need to put a new course, or like Sarah said, this monthly intensive sounded course that also might help if you're going to branch out, to have a plan on how you're going to learn the skills that you need to get there. I think would be appropriate.
I will jump in and say too that one of the aspects that you're scored on is innovation too. And so I think it's really important to have a good balance of methods that will help get you into the problem space and are reliable and well-tested methods. But I think that there's also a really important component too about, what is the innovation? Like in my case, much of my training plan is developing new analyses, new methodologies for tapping into the questions. And so I had a big portion of my grant was, here are some of the methods that, have been consistently used in research, but here's what I'm going to do also to kind of create a more innovative package is work on new analytic approaches, and then really identifying the right people too, as other people have mentioned, that can help guide you through that. So I do think it's an important balance, but you are scored on innovation, so I think that plays a really big piece.
Great, thank you. We have an F99 question. Let's see. My understanding of the F99 is it is a grant that would lead to independent research. How do you lay that out as a PhD student? Seems like it would be harder than just a good background or research ideas.
So I think that there's some confusion between the F99 and the K99. So the F99 it's a grant that leads into postdoctoral research and not into a faculty membership. But for the F99, I really just said, like, this is my plan. And like, I had a plan, but I did not have any like very solid specific ideas for a postdoc because they didn't want that. And they made it kind of clear they had like a Twitter thing where you could tweet some questions, and they made it clear that they didn't want you to have specific plans for your postdoc. They wanted you to have like a general idea, and they wanted you to have thought about it, but they didn't want anything like specific and concrete laid out because it was going to be 2 years between when you submitted the grant and when you were going to move into a new lab. So I had an idea, but it wasn't concrete, and I just had thought about it and made it clear that I had thought about like the general direction that I wanted to go.
I have a follow-up question, if that's okay, Beth. Sure. Yeah, so just to follow up on what Hassan was asking you, Candler, so when you wrote this F99, it was really encouraging for me to hear that it was about a lot of what you had already done. Were you doing this in tandem with writing your thesis defense? And to do that or identify like a topic that you were going to focus on?
No, so I submitted it at the beginning, middle-ish of my 4th year. And my plan had been that I was going to graduate at the end of my 4th year. But when I got like encouraging news that I had received this, we just kind of like put it off and said, okay, I'm going to get 2 more years of funding. This is a chance for me to learn a new technique. And so I haven't done my defense yet. It's pending at some point. I'll do it once we figure out. COVID's kind of messed everything up. But no, you have to be a candidate. So I had already done my proposal, but we pushed off the actual defense.
And did you work on this topic with your current, so your funding for F99 is with your current mentor?
Yep. So it's with the mentor that I had done all of graduate school with. For the K00 portion of the award, you have to leave your mentor, and they strongly suggest you leave the university that you're at. And so there are like interview requirements and subject matter requirements, and you have to submit a whole nother submission essentially. So you have to submit a K00 application. The money's there, it's reserved. They're not gonna like say, no, you can't have it as long as you like meet certain requirements that they've laid out. But you have to do a whole nother submission with the person that you would choose for your postdoc lab.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
All right, well, it looks like we are out of questions and close to the end of time. So thank you to all of you for coming, my attendees, but especially my panelists for taking the time and sharing your wisdom with us. I really, really appreciate it. Hopefully you will carry on and have a very good rest of your semester. But the Office of Research and the Office of Graduate Education are here to help the attendees who are contemplating either the F99, the F31, or any of the other multitude of fellowships available from the National Institutes of Health. So with that, I'm going to wish you all a happy Thursday and send you along your way. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks for coordinating, Beth.